Hello, freaks, geeks, degenerates, basement dwellers, you beautiful scrufftards, and all you annoying vatniks. Welcome to the War Zone. I'm Scruffy, and this is Skruffytalez. Well, I do believe it's basically, a year ago that I first made my first video on how Pokrovsk would become Stalingrad at the time, 2024. And then I changed it a month later to Stalingrad 2025. And the Russians have spent a year trying to reach this point. And we've been very successful in our predictions concerning Pokrovsk. We predicted that Russia would fail pushing past the Dachne and Kotlina. We predicted that Russia would try the breakthrough operation a week before it even happened, and we were spot on with the tactics. And we predicted that Russia would try and come around Pokrovsk and push for the logistics before trying to push into the city and everything. So, a good track record here for Pokrovsk. And now, since the Russians have failed in cutting logistics into Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad, they have launched a bunch of large frontal assaults against the twin cities of Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad. So now the city fighting has begun in earnest, street by street, building by building. Stalingrad 2025 has begun in earnest. So let's take a look. Right, so we're going to try and keep this short and to the point as much as possible if I'm able to do that. You know me, I usually rant, but we're going to talk about how Pokrovsk has well and truly entered the stage when it is Stalingrad 2025. The battle for the outskirts of the city and the surrounding territories is over. Now we're in the next phase, the battle for the streets themselves, the battle for the city. Russia has pushed in. And what they've tried to do is to isolate Pokrovsk, but they have failed in doing so. They have tried to push up through Kotlina to the E50 highway here and cut these supply lines. They've failed doing that. And they have also tried to push through Rodinsk to cut supplies leading in to Pokrovsk from the north. All of this happened during the breakthrough operation, the Bonnier operation. I'll show you with another map I did some time ago. Here you can see the breakthrough operation, what the goals were. What the Russians wanted to do was to cut 4 logistical lines leading towards Pokrovsk. They tried to push north to cut the supplies coming through Shakova and the supplies leading in further north towards Dobropilya. And they also wanted to do the more direct approach coming in straight north of Pokrovsk. Pokrovsk is here, to cut the supplies leading down here into town, and also reaching all the way out here to cutting supplies coming from Dobropilya through Hirishne. So this is what the Russians were after with that breakthrough operation. The Ukrainians locked down this push early on, day one. Nothing came out of it, even though it was a massive push by Russia towards Rodinsk to make this happen. But this failed, and then of course everyone focused on this push since that had more success. And the Russians, the main goals was to reach these 4 logistical lines and also securing Rodinsk and Shakova. And as you can imagine, it wasn't a massive success. They did cut this supply line. They did not take Shakova. They did not take Rodinsk. This supply line is under threat but not severed, and this supply line has remained open all along. And there were some sporadic threats, ambushes against this supply line, but it's still operational. So the Russians tried to do this in conjunction with pushing up towards the E50 from the south in order to reduce logistics into Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad, which has all failed. And since this has failed, they are now desperately pushing into Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad while Ukraine still has functional logistics. So the Russians, they have been for a long time trying to push into Pokrovsk. They've come this way, they've tried to come up this way, and of late they came through here. And they've been struggling to push in, but now, as of late, we've been talking about these saturation tactics. They've made a push in here into this area here. And now, in order to allow them to secure territory, to keep pushing, they need to force Ukraine to move their resources and manpower elsewhere. And we saw Russia doing this early on when they started applying more pressure towards Novopavlivka, forcing Ukraine to have troops down here. And now also we are seeing Russia making another big push towards Rodynske. They're coming down past this slag heap towards Myrnohrad. They're coming through Balahan into Myrnohrad, and they made a big mechanized assault from Rodivka into Myrnohrad. So they're trying to force the Ukrainians to allocate what few resources they have, what few manpower they have over a much longer front line when they're applying pressure here. And this is what the Russians are hoping will give them a chance to establish a proper presence in Pokrovsk, since Ukraine will not have as many troops and as many resources available to reinforce Pokrovsk. So this is what's happening at the moment. So now we're gonna take a closer look at Pokrovsk itself. We know what the Russians are doing around Pokrovsk in order to reduce Ukraine's effectiveness within the city itself. So what's happening? Well, Russia has for the longest struggled here, and then they took the parks, and this gave the Russians the opportunity they needed. We've been talking about how they've been saturating this part of town for ages, and after they took the parks, that is when they managed to push up into town here. This was the gap they needed to push in and link up with their saturation units, and they could now begin to contest this territory. It's a massively contested area with spread out Russian units and Ukrainians unsure of who is friendly, who is enemy, and what's going on. It is a chaotic situation in the center of town, more than likely. We can also see what the Russians are trying to do. They tried to push up here towards this area here, but the Ukrainians managed to push back the Russian saboteurs and regain control of this. This is an important area because it is where the Russians have been trying to reach, but from the outskirts, going outside the city when they tried to cut off logistics, when they tried to come up this way to cut the E50 highway. And down here you can also see that the supplies from Ryshne and Dobropilya comes in through the same part of town. So that is why the Russians came up this way. But Ukraine has secured this area. That means logistics coming in through here are technically open, and you can even move in logistics this way through the suburbs in the north to reinforce the northern part of town. But we should expect Russia to make big pushes to try and get in here to tie off these Ukrainian reinforcements coming in from the west. What the Russians are trying to do, though, that I'm seeing evidence of, or my interpretation rather of what we're seeing reported, is that you have this purple area. This is the high-rise buildings in the center of town here that the Russians are struggling with. They can't push past these. You would need as many men and resources taking one of these buildings as taking a city block up here. A much more tougher defensive location for the Russians to assault than going through these smaller housing areas over here. So what are the Russians trying to do? No. There we go. Well, as you can see, they're trying to bypass the high-rise area and these factory locations by coming up this way by the looks of it. And we are seeing Ukrainian airstrikes down here. So like we talked about a couple of days ago, they're more than likely coming up this way through Nativka, this suburb here, trying to bypass the heavy Ukrainian defensive line here with these high-rise buildings because the Ukrainians are getting resupplied from the north out of Dobropilya this way. So if Russia can begin operating here, this is roughly the same type of urban area as we're seeing here that they're currently contesting. If they can begin sneaking in their deep reconnaissance groups, their commander units, and begin saturating this area like they did here, they can actually threaten the high-rise buildings without having to enter them. So I think that is the case. So the Ukrainians, they need to quickly secure the flanks here. And we're seeing that the Ukrainians are applying a lot of pressure on this part of the battlefield to try and root out the Russians and pushing them back, regaining control of the northern part of town along the railroads here, protecting the flank of the high-rise buildings. And this is when this battle well and truly becomes horrific for everyone involved. They've been fighting along small streets and small buildings trenches and stuff like that, and that has been horrific enough. But now you get proper urban cityscape fighting. And this is when, I mean, it's just gonna be a massive meat grinder. Russia has so far trying to reach this far. They've lost 100,000 troops in total in the Pokrovsk area. 100,000 troops. 34% of their total losses in 2025 has happened here. And that is when they were not inside Pokrovsk, not inside Myrnohrad. And now they're entering battlefields that favor the defenders even more. You usually say that out here, an attacker needs a 5-to-1 advantage before drones. A 5-to-1 advantage to be successful. Having success in an urban environment, you need a 10-to-1 advantage. And we have multiple sources stating that for every Ukrainian killed, Russia suffers 5 dead of their own. And that is before entering Pokrovsk and before entering Myrnohrad. Now is when it really gets messy for everyone involved, and these high-rise buildings will be hell on earth. This is where Ukraine can grind down the Russians to an even further extent if they can hold the flanks here, because if the Russians can begin saturating this area, then the high-rise buildings, then they are in trouble, and that has to be said. But if Ukraine can secure the flanks here, hold the railroad, and deny Russia a chance to saturate the territory behind the high-rises, Russia will have no other choice than to go straight in, and that is when we will see horrific casualty figures for the Russians trying to secure individual buildings here. It's going to take weeks to take a single building, and should Russia manage to take one of these buildings, we saw in Toretsk what the Ukrainians do. They rig explosives on the bottom floor and just demolish the entire building. That's what they did in Toretsk. If they lost a building, they blew the entire thing up. So imagine the resources and manpower going into for a week or two to take one of these buildings, and then all that effort is erased as the Ukrainians just blow up that building. So this is going to be, I mean, the Ukrainians knew what they were doing beforehand. Now it's going to get really, really tough for the Russians. I fully expect Ukraine to hold. We've said this for a year now. As long as Ukraine has a single supply line open, they can hold Pokrovsk. And Russians know this. This is why they tried to push in and secure all the supply lines, right? Because they knew if there's a single supply line open, Ukraine can hold. And more than likely, we're going to see the supply line out of Ryshne being the main one. And there are some dirt roads coming down, country roads leading down from this highway down into town from the north. Have some bridges here and there. So Ukraine, even if the Russians cut off these supplies and come into Rodinsk, Ukraine can still supply Pokrovsk. And the same thing goes for Myrnohrad, where the Russians are now trying to come into the outskirts here. I mean, if they do try and get into the center of town and these high-rise buildings, it's gonna be hell on earth for the Russians here as well. So 2 cityscapes that will... The battlefield only favors the Ukrainians here. And this is going to be a horrific meat grinder. And the Russians, they're in for one hell of a ride, trying to push in on Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad without logistics being severed for the Ukrainians. This is going to be one tough fight. I am almost willing to guarantee it at this point. We'll see if the Russians can push this up here. If they manage to get up here, then the Ukrainians are in trouble. This area here. But as long as the purple here holds and Ukraine can keep the Russians away to saturate this area, then this will be a meat grinder that will be ongoing into 2026. And so, yeah. And if you're wondering, Ukrainian defensive lines in the area are built specifically to protect the supply line coming in through here, through Ryshne, and coming in from the north. Let me show you. So I'm very restrictive when I'm using maps detailing recent fortifications for the Ukrainians, but we're gonna, this has been out there for a while now, so we're going to take a look at it nonetheless. I think that's okay. We have Pokrovsk down here. Where the hell are we? This is Pokrovsk right here. So all those supply lines that we were looking at, coming down from Rodinsky here, and through Hryshny here, and that E50 highway coming in through here. As you can see, all the red are Ukrainian defenses, and you have Dobropilia. Where is Dobropilia? Dobropilia should be up here somewhere. Is it here? Somewhere up here is Dobropilia. Whoop. Anyway, as you can see, sorry for that. And you have Shakov over here. You can see the bunny ears being cut off and everything. As you can see, the Ukrainian defensive lines are built specifically in this wedge shape leading down to Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad, right? You can see that on the map, that the defenses are built to protect the supply lines leading out of Dobropilia into Pokrovsk. Ukraine intends to, I think, as long as they have these logistical line, and then there's the one coming across here and it can go down there. As long as they have these logistical lines, at least one of them, or one or two through Hryshny here, Ukraine will try and hold Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad and keep grinding down the Russians. Remember, in these two urban cities, Russia needs 20, 30, 40 to 1 to push through, especially in the high-rise building areas. Out here, 5 to 1, 10 to 1, 15 to 1. But in here, everything favors Ukraine. Everything. And they have built their defensive lines to keep these logistical lines open, to deny Russia a chance to push in. I'm thinking we're going to see a hell of a fight in Pokrovsk, and this will be Stalingrad 2025. That's it. I hope you found it interesting. I hope I'll see you in the next one. As always, go på marsch, Ukraine, and give them hell.